Hi everyone, welcome to this webinar. We'll just give it a minute or two to let a few more people in. Okay, well, welcome everyone. It's just slightly past 9, so I think we'll get started as we have a lot to get through. Before we start, just to let you know that this session will be recorded. So if you do not want to appear in the recording, then just turn off your webcam. So welcome again to this FAIR Implementation Workshop series run by FAIR Impact. This workshop is on exploring costs and incentives for data management, perspectives and tools, and the role of funders. My name is Sandra Bowerman, and I am a project member of the FAIR Impact team, and I work in the data management team at the Danish e-infrastructure consortium in Denmark. So just a little bit of housekeeping for today. We have a tight agenda, so if you have any questions, then please note them down on a piece of paper or in the chat, and we'll take them up at the end of the webinar in the last half hour. Please also mute your microphones while the speakers are presenting. I will just go on. So just a brief introduction to the FAIR Impact project. FAIR Impact is funded under the European Commission Horizon Europe program and is one of the InfraEOSC projects. The project builds on the work of the Horizon 2020 Fair is Fair project and is a coordination and support action focusing on expanding fair solutions in Europe. There are 28 partners from 10 EU member states and the UK. The project began in June 2022 and ends in May 2025. So essentially, FAIR Impact is working to support the vision of the European Open Science Clouds, where fair data can be shared and reused. The work focuses on identifying emerging tools, methods, and approaches, and supporting their adoption. And of course, we would very much encourage you all to take a look at the FAIR Impact website and look at the resources that are available there. So to start the webinar off, we have a Mentimeter with 2 questions about where you're from and what organization you are from. So you can either scan the QR code that you see on the screen here, or you can go to mentimeter.com and type in the code 88519943. So I'll just stop screen sharing and I will go over to Mentimeter. So I see that we already have a lot of responses and we have people coming in from Belgium and France, Spain, the UK, Netherlands, Copenhagen. So it looks like we have very broad representation today. Sweden, Hungary, Poland. Yeah, this is wonderful to see so many of you here today. The next question is, what organization do you present? Okay, I see we have some universities with us, research. We've got some data infrastructures. We've got some libraries. Okay, lots of research performing organizations. This is really, really good. Okay, well, thank you guys for this information. It's good to know where you're all coming from. So I will just stop sharing there and I'll go back to my slides. Okay, so just a brief overview of the session and the speakers. So first off, we'll be hearing from Stefan Cornelis de Graaf, who is a senior research advisor at the University of Copenhagen. He'll be telling us a little bit about time spent on FAIR data management. Then we have Christina Magda, who is Data Collections Development Manager at the UK Data Service, who will be telling us a bit about their data management costing tool. We also have Susanne Den Boer, who is a senior research advisor from the University of Copenhagen, who will tell us a bit about policy perspectives for data management. We then have Sylvia Janey, who is head of open science at the Swiss National Science Foundation, telling us a bit about incentives from funders for data management. Lastly, we have Ulrik Nikolai de Lichtenberg, Senior Scientific Manager from Novo Nordisk Foundation, telling us about the Danish national agreement between foundations and universities. We then have about half an hour for questions and discussion. So first off, we have Stefan. And Stefan is a biochemical engineer from the Netherlands. He was a PhD and postdoc in an MSc ITN and FP7 RIA project at universities and industry in the Netherlands and Norway. For the last 15 years, he has helped researchers in pre-award and post-award phase of European, Norwegian, and Danish natural science research projects, first at the university in Trondheim, Norway, and now in Copenhagen, Denmark. As part of that work, he has helped researchers with data management requirements of research funds. So I will now stop sharing and I'll give the floor to you, Stefan.
I had to unmute. Yeah, thank you very much. I'm Stefan, and I'm first going to show you a tool on data management costing that I found on internet, because that is very much related to the work I was asked to do on time spent on FAIR data management. This is a tool made by Technical University Delft in Holland, and this tool wants to provide an estimation of the time spent on data management, and using this time estimation, one can estimate the costs and use these costs in budgets in research proposals. These are a few questions that need to be answered before one gets a time estimate for the data management. So here the first question is, and I hope you can all see it, what is the estimated size of the research data? And I select 5 terabytes, for example. Then the question is, will you use high performance computing? And I choose yes. And then the question is, will you work with personal data? And I also choose yes there. And then there is a question about whether we use commercially sensitive data. I also choose yes there. I choose only the most difficult things. And then how many partners are involved in the project? More than 10 partners. And then you can see that this tool comes with a budget estimate for 1.5 FTE data management for the research project. So this is a tool that they made probably with rules of thumb that they quickly came up with. We asked TU Delft for the rules or what the data was behind this tool, but they couldn't give us this. But this is maybe a good first guess of the amount of time needed for data management in a project. And I will refer to this tool in the rest of my presentation. So now I switch to my slides. Yes, here they are. So this talk is about time spent on fair data management. And Dijk or Sandra actually asked me to do some work on and find out how much time our researchers at Copenhagen University, where I work, how much time they spent on data management. And the University of Copenhagen has, just like other universities in Denmark, a request for all the researchers to do data management, and this also includes PhD students. And so this request came from Sandra, and she works for Dijk, and they want to know how much time is spent on fair data management. And Dijk's objective is probably that they want to improve budget templates and improve the financial agreement with research funds here in Denmark and maybe even in Brussels. By the way, the Dijk is the Danish infrastructure consortium for developing and coordinating cooperation on research infrastructure here in Denmark. Dijk provided me an interview template for gathering data on data management. This was a very detailed, contained very detailed questions, and actually they considered all the tasks in a research project as a data management task. And I will show you on the first 4 slides what the questions were. And the first group was about creation and collection and analysis preparation. And then there was a continuation of this group of questions. And this part 2 of the creation, collection, and analysis preparation is actually the actual research work. So these are costs or time related to laboratory expenses, expenses for transcription, for identifying purchasing data sets. So this is the real research work. And then there were many questions related to time spent on verification. You can see the questions here. And the questions related to the time spent on a group of questions related to sharing and long-term storage. And when I had a look at all these questions, I thought about interviewing our researchers, then I quickly came to the conclusion that these questions were too detailed, and probably many researchers wouldn't give any answer to these questions. So I thought maybe are other models that can be used for estimating time spent on data management. And so I found this costing tool provided by the Technical University in Delft. And this is called Model 2 here on this slide. And another model that I found was a model presented by the EOS chairman. He said that we should maybe reserve 5% of the direct cost of research projects on data management. And also saw all these questions presented by, I think, in a list made by Utrecht University, but these questions did not really lead to a direct estimate of costs. I showed you already this tool made by Delft University, and they included in these costs for data management was costs related to the preparation stage of data management, the data and collection and analysis stage of data management, and time spent on data archiving, sharing, and reuse. So these tasks are actually, or the questions related to these tasks are the same task as I showed in the review template that I got from Dyke, except that these tasks do not include the real research tasks. So I thought, maybe I can use these questions for my interview with researchers. And you also saw that in this time estimation tool, there were some questions about how many partners were involved, how much data was collected or will be collected in total, how much data will be stored in accessible format, whether there is any personal data, and whether the data is interesting for companies. But a question that was not there was in which research area are you working, which is maybe also relevant. So I included these questions in my new interview template. And this template looks like this now. So what I'm doing right now is asking or interviewing my researchers who are close to the end of their project and ask them how many months, days, or percentage of your project time did you spend on creation, collection, and analysis preparation during your project. How much time do you spend on verification, and how much time do you spend on sharing and long-term storage? And then at the bottom, and last question is that I ask, are there any large costs associated to these points 1, 2, 3? For example, do you use much money on case processing, GDPR, and IP related agreements? Or do you spend much money on data storage? So here on this last slide, I present you the first data, and I only work with young researchers and doctoral network projects. So I've contact with these people, and we do not have many projects yet in Horizon Europe that are multi-partner projects that are close to the end. So that's why I did not include these data yet. So here you can see that I interviewed many fellows, Marie Curie fellows, and most of them, most of the projects are 2 years, some are global fellowships, so these are 3-year projects. And there's often only one partner involved in these projects. Sometimes there are 3. But the amount of data that they collect and work with differs a lot. Some do not work with data at all. These are mathematicians. They only work on paper and write equations and do not do any work in computers except for writing the papers. And others are writing in atmospheric chemistry and collect 20 terabytes of data that they need to work with. This also means that the amount of accessible data that they store is, or data that they make accessible, differs a lot from 0 to 3 terabytes. And some use also have personal data, and then nobody uses data interesting for companies. And then you can see that in the project time for preparation, data research, including digitization, then there are huge differences. And this is because some people need to digitize their research result, like in the last Marie Curie Fellowship on ecology, about ecology and evolution. There, someone spent 50%. And now I started wondering whether I should include this digitization in the preparation time for data management, or whether I should consider this as a research task. So maybe I should change my review template. Then people spend on between 0 and 8% of their time on verification, and between 0 and 2% on of their project time on sharing and long-term storage. And there are there's only one here who spent 1,500 euros on as additional cost probably for sharing the data or storage of their data. So these are the first results I wanted to present, and hopefully I can use these results later for validating the tool that I just presented, the tool from TU Delft. And with this slide, I would like to end my presentation.
Thank you, Stefan. Very interesting. Was there anything that actually surprised you with the responses that you got from the researchers in terms of the time that they spent on data management and verification?
Yeah, so well, this 50% that I talked about here in the bottom row on digitization, this was a huge number. But when these Marie Curie fellows explain what they're doing, and some interview people, and then they need to digitize these interviews, or some collect a lot of data with simulations, and then they need to select the data that they're going to use further. And then there is always the doubt also for them what data they should use further in their research. And this is probably also the data that they are going to store and for others, so others can validate their research results. So there is and this is difficult when we want to estimate the time spent on data management, whether we should include time spent on things that they do with the data and the researchers do with the data, whether this is part of their research work, or whether we should consider this as additional and only needed for data management. So, and that's a question I don't have yet, or answer to the question that I do not have yet.
Okay, well, thank you. Maybe somehow we'll get into it during this webinar. We'll move on to the next speaker. We have Christina Magda, who is from the UK Data Service, and she'll be telling us about their data management costing tool. Christina is the Data Collections Development Manager at the UK Data Archive, and is a dedicated data professional with extensive experience in leading key data initiatives at both national and international levels. She leads the research data management portfolio of support and training for the UK Data Service, with a particular focus on ensuring successful operationalization of the UKRI research data policy for the ESRC. Thank you, Christina. You're welcome to share your screen.
Thank you ever so much, Sandra and colleagues, for having me here today. And thank you all for joining us. I do hope you'll find the information useful, and that you get in touch with questions at a later date as well. I know sometimes questions can come after even a couple of weeks when you try the tools and you're, oh, I would like to use this, and so on. What I've done with the presentation is actually included a little bit about the UK context. So a little bit about UK Data Service, what we do, but also about our funders, UKRI, the Research and Innovation, and also ESRC, the Economic and Social Research Council. Then we delve a little bit into research data management training and support at UKDS, just to give that context, and looking at the data management costing tool and checklist, and also next steps in future directions, because there will be some changes coming quite soon within the UK landscape. So without further ado, about UK Data Service, we host the largest collection of social, economic and population research data in the UK, And it's not only about providing access to this data, it's actually providing users with support, guidance, and training to facilitate high quality social and economic research and education. And when I'm saying users, this actually includes secondary researchers, so those that use the data, but also data creators and data depositors. So we help them with making sure that their data is fair, is ready to be shared and used ethically and responsibly. We are a partnership between different organizations. Myself, I'm based at UK Data Archive at University of Essex, where we lead on the curation and the research data management training portfolio. But colleagues at Katie Marsh Institute at University of Manchester, they focus more on general training and computational social science training. Colleagues at JISC lead on impact and also some census work. And similarly, colleagues at University College London as well lead on the census portfolio in the UK. We are funded by the UK Research and Innovation through the Economic and Social Research Council, and we support the development of best practices for data preservation and data sharing. All of the slides will be made available, and I try to include as many links as possible because all of the tools, the templates that we make available are under Creative Commons licenses. So please do reuse them. We know of organizations that translated them into different languages and included them into their workflows. And we do love to hear about those stories. So do get in touch if you make use of them. When it comes to our vision and mission, our vision is for economic, population, and social research data to drive an innovative and thriving research and policymaking ecosystem, leading to enhanced knowledge, better decision, and improved outcomes in society. Our mission is to catalyze impactful social science research by providing access to high quality, curated, and trustworthy data collections of national strategic importance. And of course, in order to be able to do that, we must foster data literacy and contribute to the advancement of knowledge through dynamic data infrastructure and strategic partnerships. Now, UKRI in ESRC, UKRI was funded just in 2018. The research councils existed before. UKRI is acting as a joint operator of the 7 research councils in the UK and also Innovate UK and Research England. UKRI, it's all about supporting groundbreaking research to advance knowledge and benefit society. When it comes to ESRC, it is the largest funder of research on social and economic issues, including education, inequalities, health, economic performance, and so on. And I think especially when it comes to the fair landscape, very importantly, ESRC mandates and supports data sharing. ESRC were actually the very first council in the UK to mandate data sharing, but also support researchers in making sure that they can share their fair data. This is one of the reasons they have funded UK Data Service. We do offer 2 repositories at UKDS, one for large-scale collections, so governmental population representative data, and one for more experimental data. We have over 9,900 data collections currently, and we usually acquire around 400 new collections and new editions each year. We have around 50,000 registered users, and they account for 130 data accesses worldwide per year. To put that in practice, because we look at the numbers and it's like, that looks okay. Collection at UK Data Service is accessed every 6 minutes. That's for 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 365 days a year. Every 6 minutes, someone gets access to data from UKDS. Now, when it comes to research data management training and support at UKDS, we have a dedicated function for this. And that makes it sound like, oh, we have an entire team. We have under 2 FTEs that look after the research data management training and support function. And it's all about helping researchers effectively manage their data throughout the research data life cycle. And that might be primary data or secondary data. We have a variety of training resources with workshops and webinars. Sometimes we have to do bespoke workshops as well. On-demand materials. We have a lot of website content. We have started using RISE for an interactive module type content as well, and templates and tools. And as I said, links are available in the slides. Any questions, please do get in touch. A couple of examples of training. So we do very introductory workshops, for example, effective and practical research data management, and we do introduce researchers to FAIR, care principle, trust principles as well for repositories so that they understand why it's so important to deposit in a responsible repository. We focus on anonymization, documentation, copyright, all the key aspects within the data management lifecycle, but also some more focus session when we see there's a need within the community. Sometimes we have dedicated project for a specific type of training, as it is for longitudinal data managers. We were very lucky to get funding from ESRC and MRC, the Medical Research Council in the UK, to focus on research data management training for longitudinal data managers. And one of the training sessions for that was around synthetic data. How do we go about creating synthetic data? How should we document synthetic data? And so on. In terms of tools and templates, QA My Data is one of our most widely used tools. It's a tool that we use in-house as well. It provides a health check, I would say, for numerical data, so it can check if you have variable labels, value labels. We also have a word macro that helps with actually identifying any direct identifiers, so names, addresses. For secondary data, we make available a variable information log, and we know, again, this has been adapted by a couple of other organizations when they are ingesting secondary data, because it's really important to make sure that that data can actually be archived without infringing copyright. Or, for example, the model transcription template, and all of this, like the model transcription template, we hope researchers would use. It's not a requirement to use the template to be able to deposit with UK Data Service or UK Data Archive. They can actually use their own templates as well, as long as it's clear who is the interviewer and who is the interviewee. Now, onto the data management costing tool and checklist. I am so sorry, I have skipped the slide. As it happens, it does not want to show that slide. There it is. It helps researchers in identifying and estimating extra resources required for effective data management and sharing beyond standard research procedures. And we hope this tool aids in preparing accurate budget for data management. As I said, in the UK, we're very lucky. ESRC does support data sharing, especially fair data sharing. So they do appreciate that additional costs might be needed for different data management aspects. So we propose 4 steps for researchers to think in terms of estimating their cost. First, identify the relevant data management activities for the research project. We see a lot of research projects, especially within the social sciences, that have so many different work packages. They might collect survey data, they also collect interview data, they do some focus groups. And of course, the more work packages, the more data management activities that they're going to have, the more they're going to spend on anonymization, for example, and documentation. So this is why, firstly, they identify the data management activities that they need to have as part of their project. Then they determine the additional time and resource needed for each selected activity. We try to make it clear that, for example, with documentation, it's far easier to do it while you are working with the data. So rather than leaving it at the end of the project, do it then and there. At the end of the project is just the final check. Implementing, so incorporating this cost into the research application, and of course coordinating with institutional resources as well, and planning, scheduling management activities to ensure they complement research activities without causing delays. What are the benefits of using these tools? Well, I hope, and we all hope, that it ensures all necessary data management tasks are accounted for financially, in promoting thorough planning. We see it, I wouldn't say it's a very often occurrence. It does happen every now and then. There are fantastic projects that don't necessarily think about the data management. because ESRC mandate data sharing after three months after the end of the grant, they have to deposit that data for sharing. If they haven't taken into account the data management, it's impossible, even if they have those 3 months to prepare everything, because they haven't been considered thoroughly. They don't even have the budget to actually hire, for example, as Stefan was showing, a data manager that is actually looking over all the activities. So it can become complex quite easily. It does facilitate effective distribution of times and tools, and it actually starts researchers to think about, okay, so what kind of semi-automated tools might I be able to use for digitization, for transcription, for anonymization? And it prevents last-minute challenges by encouraging early consideration of data management needs. The data management costing tool and checklist is available under a Creative Commons attribution non-commercial share alike license. It can be integrating into training materials, research data management workflows, or institutional policies. It's available directly onto our website. And I've mentioned before, if you are using the tool or thinking to integrate it into different workflows or guides as well, in the UK as well, there are a lot of research consortium, and they usually have their guide when it comes to data management. How do I actually prepare the data to fairly share it? And they usually include this costing tool as an additional tool for researchers to use to estimate the time they need to prepare their data. Now, next steps in future directions. There are changes coming in the UK, and UKRI is currently looking at whether it's possible to have a pan-UKRI policy. So all these different research councils that I've been talking about, they have their own data management policies. I would say they're very similar. So all of them are expected data to be treated ethically and legally, of course. However, when it comes to data sharing and fair data sharing, there is a lot more emphasis, well, ESRC mandated, and a lot more emphasis, for example, with some research councils like MRC, the Medical Research Council, the Arts and Humanities Council as well, NERC, the Natural Environment. They do put emphasis on data sharing, and ESRC mandates data sharing. But this pan-UKRI policy, it's about thinking the research in even bigger terms than we have thought before. A lot of the times we talk about data collections, i.e. data and documentation. However, we want to expand to thinking about code and software, because more and more research is actually creating code and software as well. How do we support researchers in sharing those fairly, in fairing? So that is sharing, fairing. Oh, so institutions and researchers may see changes in data management and sharing requirements, and also expectations for data access, preservation, and reuse. On our end, we will adapt all the resources we make available, including the costing tool, to align with this new policy. We think especially if code is being much more prevalent in the policy, we are going to have to include a dedicated section on how do we actually document code and how do we archive code, what are the best practices. Of course, it's probably far less resource intensive than when it comes to data collections, but it is a consideration that researchers should take nevertheless. Thank you ever so much. I hope that was useful. And once again, any questions, we do have half an hour at the end of the event as well, but any questions that might come later as well, I do hope you get in touch. Thank you.
Thank you, Christina. And do you have any idea how many people use your tool, or how often your tool is used?
It's not compulsory for them to use it, and in the UK we're quite lucky because we have a very big data landscape. So ESRC probably fund around 100, no, what am I talking about? 400 collections per year. So the tool gets a lot of usage during the proposal stages because they go to the ESRC. But we know others that use different other funders are using this estimation as well. And the couple of organizations that translated it into their languages.
Okay, thank you. Our next speaker is Susanne Den Boer-Beckers, who will tell us a bit about policy perspectives for data management. Susanne is a senior executive advisor in research data management at the University of Copenhagen, Denmark. She is responsible for developing the university's policy for research data management, advises researchers and projects in how to implement good data management practice, develops courses and workshops, and represents the university in both national and international forums on data management. Susanne has a background in research with a PhD in biology. Over to you, Susanne.
Yes, can you hear me? Yeah, perfect.
Yeah.
Yes, and also I'm from the Netherlands. I'm not originally from Denmark. Stefan and I are both in Copenhagen, my fellow Dutchie. You've heard from him already. But so I'm here today to represent the university's stance, vision in data management, and also how university policy could kind of drive responsible data management. Can it? That's, I guess, the question I try to answer. But first of all, why should universities have an opinion when it comes to research data management? I think I don't actually have to present this to you. You're probably all very aware. But that's simply because in the last 5-10 years, we can see an increasing amount of international focus on responsible data management. And this is reflected in an increasing amount of principles, laws, strategies, guidelines, protocols, frameworks, stakeholder requirements, etc., etc. So in other words, universities face an increasing compliance pressure. We have to kind of live up to a lot of things in the last 10 years. So universities are basically forced to have an opinion in this area. And if I summarize what our university's goals are for research data management, I can roughly divide it into 3 categories. And I would be very interested in hearing whether you and the other universities agree with that approach. First of all, research universities are interested in responsible conduct of research. So we want the research results that are produced at this university to be transparent, trustworthy, verifiable, and of high impact. So what does that mean? We want that make sure that our researchers make data available as open as possible in alignment with the open science principles. And of course, again, because there's a legislation for this in Europe. Not only should our data be made openly available, we want the data to be reusable, including by others across disciplines. So we also should we also have a vision that we want our researchers to engage with the FAIR principles. We want our researchers to be able to defend themselves against challenges when other researchers read their articles, their published articles, and have questions about how results were generated. It is in our interest that we are able to actually provide evidence of how these results were created. So we put very much focus on having preservation plans in place where data underlying publications remain available. On the other hand, there's an increasing amount of pressure to ensure that we protect the privacy of our human participants, that we protect vulnerable populations, ecosystems, and cultural heritage. So we want our researchers to become to consider more and more in which situations they actually cannot share their data with others. And we therefore want them to engage in exercise to classify their data. Using these data classifications, we want them to employ relevant security measures so that data are as protected as necessary. And then lastly, universities are also simply interested in a good optimal use of research resources. So first of all, we want to avoid any conflicts of interests. For example, on rights to data, we want researchers to talk to their collaborators and have these type of decisions in collaboration agreements from the start. We, of course, are not interested in a reputational damage or loss of resources due to unintended loss of data or loss of research integrity. So we're very much interested in our researchers having some strategies for storage and backup. And then, of course, we want our research infrastructure to be used in the right way and not being clogged up with lots of data that everyone abandons and no one looks at anymore. So we want researchers to have some project offboarding procedures in place where they take some active decisions on what data actually can be deleted from our systems. So all in all, I think we can summarize this as what do universities want? Universities, or our university with us, we actually really want researchers to have secure research data management by design, meaning well-considered data management, considered at project start, planned for and built into processes during the research project, leading to data sharing as open as possible and as protected as necessary. I on purpose don't say as close as necessary. I think that's the wrong term. As protected as necessary, identifying what type of sharing you can use for which type of data. So secure data management by design, I think, is the overarching goal for universities. How do we get there? Well, a good starting point is, of course, to develop a policy that captures these principles into one place. And we have had a policy since 2022. You can find it under the link if you're interested. Our policy follows the order of the data lifecycle. So our policy principles go from the planning to the preservation phase. And we put most focus, if I would say one take-home message from our policy is data management planning and data management plans. That for us is a crucial tool to reach this secure data management by design. So this is why this has also become mandatory at our university. And another thing that maybe sets our university's policy apart is that we have added a third chapter where we very clearly try to describe who is responsible for what at our university. So identify roles, students, support staff, researchers, supervisors, group leaders, deans, and our rector. And the more senior you get, of course, the more responsibility you have. And at our university, it's the deans are responsible for implementing these principles for good data management locally at their faculties. So is that the end of it? Policies, we fixed it. Now we will see gradually good data management because we have a policy. No, that's not the reason at all. That's not how it works. And I can tell you this out of experience. I've worked on this area for 10 years. I wrote this policy, and I've also taught thousands of researchers by now. So have collected some opinions. Researchers actually don't read a policy. I've been a researcher myself. I really didn't care about all this administrative paperwork coming from higher up. So a research policy is not something you write for your researchers. It has another purpose. And late yesterday, I thought, how do I illustrate what I think the purpose is? I try to illustrate like this, and I hope it makes sense to you. But I see our university as a big container ship. Huge, it goes steadily on its course. If we want the container to move, change direction, this is a very slow process. The same for data management. We have 10,000 researchers. Simply just communicating new compliance requirements out to them is an almost nearly impossible task. We have long decision-making chains. Change is actually really slow. And again, a policy by itself is not going to make this change happen. Again, I think research don't hardly read it. Policies, in my eyes, simply set the direction into which we want this container ship to go. This is the end goal, and of course, this end goal is also a moving target. But this is the direction we want to go to. How do we get there? We actually need a couple of pilot boats to move our container ship in the direction that we have set. And these pilot ships are these incentives that we have to have additionally to make this change happen. And I just want to highlight my top 3 take-home messages that I have collected myself over the last couple of years. What do we need to have in place to get researchers to act in accordance with our policy? Well, first of all, we at the universities very much need to focus on the carrot and not just the stick. Yes, it's very important to tell our researchers that there's GDPR and they understand that this is important, but they are not driven by all of these requirements out there. They want to know first and foremost, what's in it for me? Why should I bother spending my time on this? So I've come to realize it's super important to highlight this, and I want to hear from you later. Are you agreeing with me on this? Just some examples. I mentioned this planning already. We have lots of researchers who have very complicated collaborations going on with multiple partners, personal data thrown in, movement of physical material, human material across borders, all of these things. And I always have a dialogue with them. It would be a very good idea, I say to the researchers, that you figure out what type of approvals, legal, ethical approvals you need, what type of agreement you make on rights to data. You need to do this at project start. And if you don't do this using a data management plan and planning thoroughly, you will actually hit a roadblock in your project. Trying to fix things legally afterwards is going to drag out your project for many, many months, especially seeing the scarcity of legal resources we have to support this. So really, data management planning at project start, even before you maybe write your grant proposal with all of your collaborators, is a super good idea for you in the project to have things run smoothly. That really resonates with them. Another thing, fair data management, fair principles. We are still in a situation that the majority of researchers, for them, this is super abstract. Why should I bother about making my data reusable to other people in other disciplines? Why is that in my interest? But then I say step one in employing the FAIR principles is already being fair at home in your own research institution. Don't you want to be able to find and open your data sets and understand your own data sets in 10 years from now? And what if you have 10 PhD students? Are there data in 10 different locations and you don't even know where they are anymore? Wouldn't it be a good idea to have a preservation plan based on the FAIR principles that you implement just locally as a first step on this FAIR journey to kind of be able to reuse your own data for a new student? Yes, that actually makes sense, right? This is a strong incentive for them. And then, of course, anything that can save them money is a good idea. Why should we buy another -80 freezer for all of our samples? Shouldn't we kind of try to throw away the samples that we no longer need to save on energy? Likewise, infrastructure use. Our infrastructure at this university, the amount of data is increasing so rapidly that we actually now have to start introducing payment models for infrastructure. So big data researchers actually have to start paying for their storage very soon with us. And that actually is going to force them a little bit in making decisions on what should they actually have stored, because it turns out many of them store data that they actually don't ever use anymore. So there is some, if we take a dialogue in that direction, that actually makes them see why this is relevant. And we can see that already because we have lots of departments who now bottom up, without having been told by the dean, but bottom up start to introduce incentives to standardize their approach just locally. So I think that's a very important thing that we have to focus on. A second thing that we have to do at universities, we just don't release a policy and sit there and wait until change happens and some people pick it up. They don't. We actively have to facilitate it, make this path easier for the researchers. So of course, we need to translate these policy principles in discipline-specific guidelines and templates where relevant. We need to make sure that we have support staff hired to help researchers in this journey. We need to offer training to various target groups. Sometimes that can be directly to researchers, or sometimes this can be to local support staff. And then lastly, we should also have all of the necessary infrastructure to facilitate secure data management by design. And of course, and I think that you're all in the same situation, this is also a gradual process for us. And we are in the process of building this up step by step. And we already have e-courses for students, data management plan workshops for Horizon fellows, lots of training, lots of support already. But also this is rather a slow process, but we must do this. Last thing that I want to highlight is that I think, and here actually the carrot sneaks, the stick sneaks back into it again. We cannot have this change happening without at least a little bit of external pressure going on. And in Denmark, that external pressure, I think, to my opinion, is lacking still a little bit. And I pointed mostly to our funders who don't have the big data management requirements yet. I can see that researchers who have funding through Horizon, actually they are forced to make data management plans. They hate it at first, but we hook into that requirement by offering workshops for them. And when we take them through the whole process, they actually understand why this is important, why this makes sense for them. And it's not just an administrative exercise, and they will do it again in the future. So funders actually have a very big role in helping drive this field forward. And we at universities, again, have to hook into that by offering services to support the researchers. So, and same for publishers, of course, away with these, allowing these vague availability statements to be accepted, be more stronger into asking data to be deposited in research repositories instead. And of course, that's a change that's already happening. But we can see that is underway. Researchers are not always happy about it, but they in the end see the point, and once they have gone through the exercise once or twice, it's actually not such a complicated task for them any longer. So just want to summarize that I don't think data management policies is something that we have to have, but they are not alone. They are not by themselves are going to drive good data management. It's not going to happen. We have to have them because they set a direction for the organization and they present a framework for the development of support services. And for us, a data management policy has also helped to highlight the responsibility. So who's actually responsible for doing this? And there's a clear signal that research leadership is responsible for doing this. So that's the purpose of the policy. It's more like a governance document at the university that helps set directions. We do need other incentives to make change happen. We need to be able to make clear what's in it for the researchers. We need to support them at all, any way we can. And we should have a dialogue and hope that there are some stakeholders that help with a bit of external pressure, even though I think research will probably hate me saying that. But this is what I have experienced really helps speed up change. Yes, that was what I wanted to say. Thanks a lot. And of course, contact me if you have any questions afterwards also.
Thank you so much, Susanne. That was very interesting. And with that last bit on incentives, we then move over to the part of the workshop which is coming from the funders' perspectives. And we have first Sylvia Janey. Sylvia is Head of Open Research Data at the Swiss National Science Foundation. She holds a PhD in biophysics and an MBA in healthcare management. After 20 years as a lecturer in different research performing organizations, she joined the SNSF in 2014 as Head of Interdisciplinary Project Funding, where she was involved in project evaluation and the implementation of DORA. Since 2023, Sylvia is responsible for the implementation of the Open Research Data Policy in collaboration with national stakeholders. She's also a delegate of the European Open Science Cloud. Over to you, Sylvia.
Thank you very much for this nice introduction and also for the invitation to this workshop, because I have already learned a lot just from the 3 first talks, and you will see that I'm very much in line. So my talk now probably, and I should go to the beginning, very much is in line and comes to the right time now in the program. So what are the incentives that the Swiss National Science Foundation is trying to give? And actually our policy of introducing fair research data management into the research grant lifecycle dates back already to 2015, where we published an ORD policy and also redefined what we understand by scientific excellence, which is what we want to fund. And of course, as a tool, we ask since then for data management plan. And we have started also since last year to monitor these data sharing practices. This is what was done in the first stage of awareness raising. We are now starting to think about going further. And I fully agree with Suzanne that publishing an ORD policy is not enough. And we know that very well. So, of course, one thing we would like to do is in the idea of awareness raising is to ask also for fair research outputs. So what comes after granting and after having done the project. We are also in the stage of incentivizing we are already there, that we are providing actually some funding to PIs to do research data management. But here again, we could go further, and the ideas of the first two talks, I will take them back to our institution. Then where we are working on now is to think about asking explicitly in the project plan to develop a methodology that allows for fair data collection and storage. And then things that are not yet, that are in the pipeline, but not yet where we don't have agreement yet from our stakeholders and our research council, is how to make that explicit also in the major achievements of the CV that we are asking for. And then, of course, the rewarding part is going to be even, that's the carrot, but also the stick if you don't align and if you don't do it. And I will come back to that later in my talk. So our SNSF policy, ORD policy, is now a little bit outdated, I must admit, and I will go back also to my management and say, okay, we should actually more have a fair research data management policy. That was very inspiring now to hear about that. And but clearly the awareness raising has been made. So we have in our funding regulations that grantees are obliged to make available to the public in an appropriate manner the research results obtained with the help of SNSF funding. So it has been clear since 10 years. But a bottom-up approach is favored, and there are no sanctions. And if somebody doesn't do it, it has no consequences. And that's, of course, well, the way we prefer to go. It would be better if everybody understands what is in there for themselves as researchers to do fair research data management. So the SNSF model of excellence is also kind of now quite old in a time scale of research, but it clearly shows actually that the research culture is connected to having a knowledge gain for society and for research and for any stakeholder. And it also states that that the outputs have to be disseminated in line with open science principles. So what we have now is that we ask for a data management plan at the project start. So the typical setup of such a data management plan. And what we have at the end still, and that's, I think we have that all in some forms, some standardized forms. We ask about how the output look like, and we ask specifically also, so here are the different, you ask for personal data, but it's the data of personnel that was involved in the project. And then scientific publications, also any kind of events. We have also some use-inspired outputs. Here is hidden actually about software, because at the time we were designing this output collection template, we were thinking that software is actually just for some more use-inspired projects. And we have also the data sets. And here we can ask, or the researchers can declare the persistent identifier and whether the data are freely accessible, and the licenses and so on, and the description of the data. We will see in the next, or in an over next slide, how that has been adopted by the researchers. Okay, it's already there. So that's what we could analyze from our data sets about this data declaration in this output template. And we see that the share of completed grants that are sharing at least one data set is increasing since the introduction of the DMP and the output and the data output reporting tool, which was introduced a little bit later in 2017. So that's the good news. In 2023, we had 360 of 1,546 completed grants since that period. So only 23% that declared at least one data set. In this 1,337 data sets that were declared, that corresponds to 3.7 data sets per grant. So the ones that are declaring actively, but again, this share should increase. So these are the numbers that have been reported to MySNF, so our reporting tool in 2023. From these data sets, the researchers have chosen a hosting solution that in most cases, 80%, though not 100%, follow FAIR principles. And Zenodo is the preferred repository used by 35% of this data. So there is a tendency, we are on the way, but it's a long process, and making it easy is for sure going to be a solution. So as Suzanne already said. So and now what we are not yet at is we are not 100% sure actually that the data that are declared are fair. So what we have not done is actually a connection between the data management plan at the project start and what comes at the end. So these are two completely separated processes that are usually 4 years apart. And actually the researchers do the DMP because they have to. And actually, I must say that 10 years ago, when we introduced the DMP, this initiated at the university side that a full network. So in 10 years, there is a full network of data managers that have been put in place. So that's what actually triggered. And I would pretend that it's mainly SNSF's achievement here just to have this incentive or this awareness raising happening. So that's the very positive note. So and here I agree that the funders have a very big role to play. Now, of course, how do we make this data management plan actually a tool to go to fair output? That's what we are working on now, and that's why I'm very interested in the tools you have presented up to now in this webinar. So to incentivize ORD contributions in project funding, we have explicit possibilities in the SNSF grant funding requirements or requests to budget in the project at the beginning, at the proposal stage, various budget points that are related or can be related to data management. And that's, for example, the article publishing costs for OA publication. Of course, that's more OA open access. Then we have a maximum 10,000 budget for explicit access or granting access to research data. So that's the budget we thought would be the one that is reasonable to engage for now or in the last 10 years. We see that actually only 25% of the applicants use actually this budget part. So they don't even think of asking the money at the beginning when they are doing their proposal. And then, of course, you can hide more or less this data management in some other budget items, such as computing time, data acquisition and data acquisition and access, material of enduring value, that can be some hardware for that, direct costs of infrastructure use. So this is also somewhere where since we are funding infrastructures that involve data curation and services to the researchers, these costs can actually also be used to use these infrastructures. And of course, if there are some subcontractors offering data management, this could be also an option. And salaries, if the PI engages or dedicates some postdoc time to data management, that fits also into the budget and is allowed for the budget. But funding for the research data management is only done if already requested within the proposal. So here we are expecting that researchers are anticipating on that, and that's exactly what is not happening. And what we are working right now is actually to have a more explicit requirement in the project plan to show or to declare that a management or research output management is going to be done fair by design, actually already during the project, and not at the end when suddenly you realize you have to curate your data and make them available or fair. And here I'm closing the loop of my talk, saying okay, that's what we have all done. We are now on the incentivizing part by having actually the project, because the project plan is evaluated. If we ask for fair by design data management within the project plan, of course, this is going to put some more pressure on the researchers, because they will say, okay, if I don't do that, or if I don't put this in my plan, in my project plan explicitly, and I may have a lower chance to get funded. And as I already said at the beginning, some next step would be also to have, if we look at this project grant life cycle, actually what comes out of the project is some output that is going to be fed in the CV. So if we ask at the project plan level, okay, do it and do a DMP and research data management, eventually in 4 years' time, the time of typical projects, it will also be visible as a research achievement or as an output, and should come up into the CV. So, and then if we have all that in place, then we can start actually to reward. That's how we see it. And that's why it's so slow. And look also at the research data management quality and have some assessment of it, and also then introduce an open research data or fair research data management evaluation criterion, and adapt the assessment processes. But again, we have to have a critical mass that is already into that to agree actually for us that we change the rules here, and 25% is not yet enough. So that's why we will be a little bit more patient, but prepare everything to do it. So with this, I thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you, Sylvia. It was very interesting to hear about the processes and the monitoring from the Swiss National Science Foundation. Next, we go on to Ulrik Nikolaj de Lichtenberg, who will be telling us a bit about the Danish context between funders and researchers. Ulrik is a senior scientific manager at the Novo Nordisk Foundation. He oversees strategy and project development in data science, AI, and digitalization. With a background in engineering and data science applied to life sciences, Nikolai has held senior roles in the pharmaceutical industry, focusing on digital transformation and informatics. Now he supports academic research in data science and AI with a focus on life sciences application.
Thanks. I'll try to see if I can figure out how to share my screen so that you can also see it. So first question, are you seeing the presentation now?
We do.
Okay, good, because it's always, you're off to a bad start if people see the other screen. So thanks for the invitation to speak here. I agree very much with pretty much everything that's been said by all the previous speakers. And it's always difficult to come last because you don't know what the others are going to say. But a lot of what I've put in has also been covered by others. So I think we should be good. Very briefly on myself, my own background. I'm sort of an academic by training, an engineer, PhD in bioinformatics, was an assistant professor, and then joined the pharmaceutical industry to work for 2 of the pharma companies in Denmark. And for many years, I was the head of research, IT, and data management. So all the sort of the global responsibility for all the research data. I then 5-6 years ago joined the Novo Nordisk Foundation to help them build up their funding programs and activities within data science and AI. And there's a large data management component to that as well. But I think the reason I'm invited here today is that I also chair a sub-working group under a national initiative to try to implement FAIR and data management in between the universities and all the stakeholders. So it's touching a lot upon what Susanne said and Sylvia and the others. So just briefly about the organization I work for. The Novo Nordisk Foundation is maybe not that well known abroad, but it is in fact the world's 3rd largest foundation in terms of its annual granting budget. So number 1 is the Gates Foundation, number 2 is the Wellcome Trust in the UK, and we're number 3. So we award a lot of money for philanthropic grants for research. So we have tons of grantees, and I think this year we will surpass this threshold where we are supporting directly, fully or partially 10,000 different people around in the research space. Strategy-wise, we sort of focus on health and sustainability. We sometimes call the sustainability the planetary health part. And in the middle, we have this sort of aggregating function that we call the life science ecosystem. It's a somewhat confusing group, but this is where all the fundamental research lives, the enabling technologies, management part, translation into sort of innovation, education of young children, etc. So we try to sort of support across the board. That's not the topic of the presentation, but this is just to give you a glimpse into who we are. I wanted to start off with a few sort of data management challenges. This is more of a personal perspective that why do we need data management? And I think everyone is probably familiar with this in this call, but statistically, what's on the right is likely to happen and what's on the left is less likely to happen. And the consequence of that is that this is the natural state of things. This is actually a picture from some professor's office. And this, which it would look like in the pharmaceutical industry, is unnatural. And actually, in order to move from there, from right to left, you have to put in effort and energy. And this seems to come as a surprise to people over and over again, despite the fact that this was worked out in the 1800s. And it's called the second law of thermodynamics, that the natural state of things is disorder. So this is why we need data management. It doesn't happen by itself. The other challenge is that data analysis gets all the attention in science. So I kind of put up, I'm the AI data science guy, it's my old background, and what people see is we ran all this Python code and generated fantastic results. What people don't see is that 80% of the project was about collecting the data, cleaning it, QCing it, accessing, organizing it, and this is sort of hiding underneath the surface. And this is the challenge that I think everyone in this call will appreciate, that this isn't getting the attention it deserves. So those in the know, they know this is important, but a lot of people don't. So what are we doing in this space? And I'm sort of very humbled by the other presentations because probably many others are doing better than we are in this space. But we've tried to take some of these steps that actually it is a part of our articulated strategy, like we heard from Switzerland just before, that dissemination of knowledge according to the FAIR principle, sort of sharing the data is part of the strategy, something we expect from the grantees. We've maybe been less good at translating that into concrete things or demands that we set up, and we can get back to that. But there are some programs, and some of them, these ones I drafted myself, where it's very explicit that we do support in the budgets. We encourage and we support and we ask people to, we specifically say data management is a cost that you can include in your grant budget. We also have programs where we support databases and sort of data as infrastructure, which is direct support for projects that build up data collections or databases and promote sort of the open sharing curation of it. There are some examples here on the right. One of them, for instance, is sort of a national health data science sandbox. How do you teach people to work with data that is GDPR sensitive, that you need a permit to work with? You have to create sort of a synthetic version of it or some anonymized version. So it's a big project on that. And these are the kinds of the things we do. But there's also many programs in the foundation where we don't have this in. So we're not at the level of maturity where we've put this in as a requirement for everything and have very clear policies on this. So the purpose of the talk here is mostly to sort of, this was my foundation hat, but I'm also part of this national task force to try to implement this. And that's the real topic of the presentation. So all of this, as many of you know, go back to when a lot of scientific disciplines went from being very data poor to being very data rich. And then it started making more and more sense to actually share the data. But there's a very huge cultural barrier to doing this. And then in 2016, a group of brilliant people issued a paper on what should you share and how should we share it, the FAIR principles. And 3 years later, the EU adopted that as a directive called the Open Data Directive. And that was then supposed to be implemented in every country via a national data management plan and sort of a strategy. So I've been part of that work of helping to write that strategy and then sitting in this follow-up or implementation-oriented group that advises the ministry of this. And we issued these reports. We just issued one at the end of last year. So this is the current setup of this National Advisory Task Force, where there are groups on policies and tools, a lot of the things that were covered earlier by the other speakers. Digital infrastructure, long-term storage, competence development, knowledge sharing, security, the cybersecurity thing, the whole valuation of data. I chair the one on funding, and you can imagine why, because I come from a foundation. But this is kind of the University Funder Relations Forum. These are the people involved, and if you're not from Denmark, you probably won't recognize the faces or the names, but the idea is here we have university representatives, and we have representatives from the public foundations, as well as the private foundations that I represent. So the big questions we are discussing and dilemmas in funding of data management, one was covered in the beginning of the seminar, getting a grip on the cost. What costs are we talking about? Which are these expenses and what do they cost and what is reasonable? This is sort of the planning part of it. Then aligning on roles and funding models. Who should finance or fund what and how should they do that? Where does the money come from and what's the mechanics of this? And then lastly, which was touched on by Sylvia just a minute ago, how do you create this overview? How do you actually monitor if people are sharing the data? What's happening in that space? We're not that far down that road, but this is also very important for steering and incentivizing. So aligned with what I think Stefan showed as well, we also tried to sort of look at the expenses and split it up into these phases, where phase one is data production and collection. And I apologize for this slide being in Danish, but I think you've seen this before, and you get the idea that you have to create a data management plan, you have to get permits, you have to create the data, annotate it, you have to quality control it. And much of this is essentially salary. It translates as salary and FTEs. The challenge with this that we've found is that often when you look into budgets trying to map this out, these costs are not necessarily reflected in the grant budgets as data manager or data steward A, B, and C. A lot of this work is actually done by postdoc A or postdoc B or PhD A. So it's kind of hidden in there. So there's more of this than what you can see, because you have to make assumptions, as some of the earlier speakers did, how many percentages of a project is actually this. That's a difficult, it also varies between fields. Then there's the verification of data, the digitalization. So Stefan had an example where this was a huge part of the project, and in some projects it's not at all. Formatting, annotating metadata. You could in some sense say that A and B data production and verification should ideally be sort of one big chunk. But the conclusion is the same, that this is mostly salary and it can be hidden. Sometimes it's explicit. If this is a huge part, if it's done by a dedicated data steward or data manager, it is reflected in the budget. Otherwise, it's kind of hidden under other salary costs. And then lastly, we move to sharing when you hand the data off to someone else. Then this is where we have all the expenses for IT and disks and storage in addition to salary. So we try to create national alignment on funding principles for this. So the use of international repositories, that's number one. If you upload your protein structure to the PDB database run by the EBI, then it doesn't cost the researcher anything, it doesn't cost the university anything. So this is funded indirectly by the Danish state via central funding or contributions to the EU, to SANS or EMBL. So this is an invisible cost, but it exists. Then you have the national or local Danish repositories that are operated by universities or DIKE, and the normal use of this below a certain level, it is most practical that this is just kind of covered. But if you have over normal or over some threshold, we're starting to see that a fee is charged. And this seems to work very well, because you can then, if you know what that fee is, you can include that in your budget application, and then ultimately it's paid by, for instance, the Novo Nordisk Foundation. The challenge in this area that we found is that there are certain scientific disciplines with a very low degree of external funding. A lot of the humanities, the only money they have is coming from the central university budget. So they are kind of challenged. They can't sort of relay the cost to the funder in quite the same way. And then we have the third sort of special class where you produce massive amounts of data. And here it's completely obvious that, of course, if a funder wants to fund a project that demands bespoke infrastructure or enormous amounts that go beyond what these local repositories or international repositories can sustain, then whoever wants to listen to the music has to pay for it. So here it's clear that the funder has to pay. It has to be part of the funding application. One of the things we have then also worked on, both in this group, but mostly in a separate forum between all the universities and the 4 or 5 largest private foundations, is this whole discussion of how much should be paid in what the foundations don't like to call overhead, but sometimes the universities call this overhead. So essentially, if you take the cost to the left, it's sort of software tools, IT storage, and salaries is most of it. So those are the costs. The question is then who pays? Should it be the external funders? Should they pay the whole thing? Or is there some kind of university-based funding that should pay some of these costs? That's the interesting discussion. I think this probably goes on in every country with every funder. And in Denmark, it's been every funder have themselves defined what they thought made sense. There's a huge difference between the level of overhead between some public foundations and private foundations. And this has been going on for years. The universities have felt that there was too little overhead. So essentially, how do you pay? either you pay this unspecified overhead or it's part of the grant budget. And this has been the discussion that's been going on in a very systematic way that led to this agreement on what is not called overhead, but indirect project supplement. It's not all foundations, but it's some of the major private foundations in Denmark. So step one was a financial analysis of the historical research budgets to assess sort of real world costs. What do things actually cost? This was a very complicated exercise to do. And then number two was a discussion of how much and what did the foundations sort of want to pay for, and what should the universities cover. So they kind of struck a deal on that, reducing it then in practical terms, in terms of implementation, to a fixed sum per year per FTE. So every PhD student or postdoc comes with this additional fee. There's a slightly different rate between dry and wet research. If it's data science, that's the dry part. If it's lab equipment, it's a little bit more expensive, but it's around 30,000 euro per person right now. In terms of data management, the challenge comes up here, because if you look into the step one here, what are the financial numbers on this? They are probably, or I'm completely convinced that they are lowballing the costs for data management. And the reason is, again, that these costs are labeled as something else. It's not a big disaster, and I'll tell you exactly why in a minute. But this has been one of the dilemmas, because these costs are invisible. Many of them have not, they haven't reserved much room in this indirect profit supplement for data management. So a lot of that is still sort of included in the grant budget. The good news is that there is a willingness among funders to cover these expenses, whether it's directly in the application or if it's this indirect project supplement. Neither the researchers, the universities, or the foundations report that data management costs are being rejected. So people are getting what they apply for. The public foundations, they fund more of it via this overhead, and sort of a mix of direct and overhead funding. And the private foundations, because it's hidden, have not included too many of these costs in this indirect profit supplement. So it is mostly funded via the grant budgets, but that may change if this becomes more visible. And this is renegotiated with a certain frequency. So if this becomes more visible as a cost, some of that might float up. It doesn't make any material difference, because again, the good news is that everyone agrees this is a good idea and it is being funded. But the universities, they probably face some challenges in areas where there is no external funder, because here the university has to cover these costs. Where we see room for improvement is that these practices and policies, they vary between and within foundations. So even within my own foundation, there's a variation in what we actually put into these grant calls, depending on which area it is. And we can probably improve in that space along the lines of what Susanne said. So this is what we report, the research, they kind of experienced there's a great diversity of what's being done. So we don't yet have a national agreement or a fully focused sort of way of doing this or setting these requirements. The foundations, especially the private ones, are very focused on avoiding additional reporting and bureaucracy. And this has been a large driver for not requiring all kinds of things. So there is this chicken and the egg problem that if you demand data management plans and compliance and policies, then the researchers will call you, the foundation, to ask, how do I comply with all these things it says in the guidelines? And if you are not quite sure, because you are not involved in the practicalities of this, or because this repository where you're supposed to put your things, it doesn't yet exist, you get into this chicken and the egg problem where it's difficult for the funder. It's very easy for us to say, we expect you to adhere to GDPR, because that's a well-defined thing. But if you don't know, if you don't have a plan, a template for data management plans, and you say you should do one, then people will call you, say, what should it look like? And then we will say, we don't know. So this has been a challenge for many, especially the smaller private foundations, that they've been wanting to avoid getting involved in this. But I think this is changing, because the universities now have these policies and templates, so that there's something to point to now So I think this is going to massively improve over the coming years. So foundations are lastly very interested also in frameworks for assessing the value of data, because one of the concerns that some of the foundations have, one of the heads of research in one of the other foundations said to me at one point, we only have the money we have, and the only thing we're doing with it is giving it away to the universities. So there won't be more money. So the more money, if there's a lot of additional cost for storing data that has a low value, it's going to be taken away from other value-adding things. So we put some attention to, does it actually make sense to do all this data management and store all this data? Is it worth the cost? So this is a thing that's also going to come back, especially on long-term storage. Should we stop? So this is one of the other tracks in this national forum. How do we assess the value of data at a high level, but also very concretely? Should we or should we not keep this data set for the next 10 years? And I think that concludes my part. And I think we can move on to Sandra then.
Thank you, Ulrik. That was really interesting, both with the hidden costs perspective on things and also the compliance perspective. So now we've reached the part of the webinar where it's open for questions. So I'll first ask the room. Does anyone have any questions or comments for any of the speakers? Okay, Anne-Sophie.
Oh, let me just put my camera on. Yeah, thank you all for so very interesting presentations and really eye-opening also for the sort of perspective across stakeholders here. I would like to ask Stefan and apologies if I didn't get it. Did you intend to sort of continue your interviewing on data management cost within Copenhagen University, or sort of in order to sort of validate your findings and really get into this?
That's my idea. Yeah, I think I need to have a discussion with Susanne first about what to include in this data management about digitization, for example, whether we should leave it out or not. This question about what is actually the research and what is extra work for doing this, the data management.
Yes, that would be very interesting, and pointing to all of the very great attendance to this event. I think that could be a very interesting article in this aspect, and maybe if we could also get the funders input on this.
Yeah.
Thank you very much.
Yep.
René?
Yeah, hi, I'm René. I'm also from Dijk in Copenhagen. So I think that this chicken and egg problem is crucial, and if to get the ball rolling and get the researchers engaged in providing covering this cost they already do, but then they minimize it and they kind of like don't really do the verification and so on, because they would rather use the money for something else. And it's, except if they are the kind of researchers who really understand that this data has to be super quality and I have to make it fair, and there is everything in between. So to get the ball running, couldn't one say that when you are a scientist and you write an article and you're referring to some scientific postulates, theories, whatever, based on some data analysis, then this data, it has to be clear what data this is, and it has to be accessible somehow. It could be in very bad quality, it could be whatever, but that's up to the scientists' pride of what do they want to display. So what I'm getting at is, shouldn't it be a reasonable demand without any risk of the scientists calling the funder asking, how do I do this? Simply to demand that any data that is referenced, it has to have a PID. That hardly can be a problem for the funder to say how to do that, because that's actually old technology. That would get the ball rolling, in my view.
I think this is for maybe Sylvia and Ulrik.
No, and Ulrik, yeah, and Sylvia, yeah.
So if I could jump in, so we are asking that actually, but of course
Yeah.
we are not sanctioning the people who are not doing it. First of all, because it's very difficult to track. There are so many publications coming out from the research we are funding. So to track exactly this link, it's almost, we are trying. That's the first attempt was this monitoring that I was showing, but we are not the correctness of this is of the methodology is absolutely not 100%. So that's an issue. And the other thing is actually that publishers are already doing that. They are asking for the data sets. And then we get into this new old problem of saying, okay, but then it belongs to publishers, and we are back to the stage where publications actually belonged or were not open access, and so on and so on. So here, that's exactly the pitfall we don't want to reproduce, which we did with our publications. And how do we avoid this? And that's why it's a little bit more complicated. But I agree that the incentive is clear, what you are suggesting.
So my point was not that you neither need the data, nor do you need to have any opinion about who owns it. The only thing you request is that if you in an article speak about some data and you base your scientific discussion on some data, then this data there has to be a pointer to this data. And this pointer can maybe lead to the data in a poor state. That's a different debate. But simply,
publishers are doing that.
Yeah,
some journals are doing that, and that's it. Then it becomes problematic because they get the copyrights or the intellectual property rights there. So here that's where we so, but maybe Nordis can say something.
I can chip in on this as well. I come from the field where they found a way to do this that I think really works, the field of bioinformatics. So this is all the genetics data, all the protein structures, and the fact that all of these were collected over 50 years led to the breakthrough with AlphaFold being able to predict the structure of a protein. But that field has figured out how to do it in a way that seems to work. So the big key here is an alliance between international, open, publicly funded and run repositories like the Protein Data Bank and the journals, that if you want your science paper published on the structure of a protein, you have to deposit it in PDB. Otherwise, they're not publishing your paper. But they don't run into the problem that Sylvia alluded to, because the funders or the publishers, the Nature Publishing Group or Science, they don't control the actual data. It's just a link to an identifier in a database that everyone can access that is under democratic public funding and control. So this is the way it's done, because it is nearly impossible for the funders to monitor and chase their grantees, figuring out whether they shared it or didn't share it. You can, to some degree, report these IDs in. And this is a thing that actually would be great if we could cite data sets to a larger degree, as we do with papers and publications, because this is working very well, that people are looking for citations, they're looking for papers, and in order to get there, they have to share their data. So that incentive structure works, I think, very, very well. But the tricky bit here is that the reward for the researcher is indirect. If you share a data set, then people are not citing the data set, they're citing the paper in which the data set was referenced. And this is the challenge, that there's a lot of fields where you have a huge incentive to share data because it's going to earn you massive amounts, thousands potentially, of citations because others are reusing the data. But they're citing the paper. If they cited the actual data set, that might change something. So maybe this would be a way to get there, to create a bibliometric system around the data identifiers. But at least as a starting point, make an alliance with the journals that it has to be not put with them, but in a public repository. But they have to, it's so efficient when they say you can't publish your paper unless you deposit it over here.
Thank you, Ulrik and Sylvia. We have a question from Sasha in the chat. Sasha, would you like to ask this yourself? Or
Yes, thank you. Thank you for the very interesting presentations, all of you. I had a question for your Ulrik, because you mentioned at one of the last slides, I think, that some of the issues you're talking about is about the value of the data. Because is it necessary to keep all the data when maybe in a couple of years they're not used anymore? It proves not to be useful. But value is, I was wondering if what do you consider value in this case? Is that including impact, for example, which is more difficult to estimate, or what do you consider value?
It's a super good question, because the cost is easy to estimate. How much space does it take up on the disks? How many people do we need to employ to sort of manage this in a library setting? That's easy, but then you have to balance that against what is the value, and I don't have the answers either. There are many attempts at this, and we have a whole sort of working group nationally trying to, where Susanne is also sitting, trying to sort of assess the value. How should we value this? Of course, it's not that big of a deal if it's small data sets taking up very little space, and every year you can buy a bigger disk for the same amount of money. But if the volume of data, if everyone shares everything, that's going to amount to a lot of cost. And I don't have the answer to how you sort of evaluate, but of course, use statistics would be one potential way to look at it, saying, okay, if this data set is used all the time, but a lot of people download it many times, if this data set has been touched by no one for 20 years, maybe the value is less. But there are so many angles you can go at, and maybe Susanne could pitch in on this.
Yes, that's exactly. I sit in this working group also on value, but we have literally just started. It becomes already quite clear is that value very much depends on who you ask. Value, there are different parameters. For example, value can be direct or indirect economic value if your data can translate into an invention, for example. That's a very obvious value that people think about. But value can also be value for society, where, for example, the Danish National Archives are interested in storing data that are of cultural relevance, for example. There lies some value. There is some scientific value. How big of an impact will my data have on my field and move my field forward? There's some value there too. There's some compliance value. What happens if I accidentally lose these data in relation to compliance with legislation? So data are more, yeah. So there are all these different components to take into account, and different stakeholders that have different opinions. So it is actually a very difficult question. We are in Denmark going to approach that by making a framework for this, or describing these different value components and asking all these different stakeholders for input on this. And we hope to end up with some sort of guide that researchers or different stakeholders can use to assess determine what value means for them. But yeah, no one size fits all answer at this point yet. It's a complicated question.
Does Christina at the UK Data Service, do you have a policy about that? Sorry, is that okay if I ask you about that?
Yes, of course. I guess it's very similar to what Susanna was saying in terms of they do focus a lot on value in terms of society. The view of the funders here is what is funded with public money, there must be value. There's actually in all of the applications, there is a section on value for money. You need to demonstrate how you actually produce value based on the money that they're giving you. In terms of the data that is archived, there is quite a difference between all of the data that's being collected and the data that's made available for reuse. So funders would not expect all of the data that's being collected because a lot, especially with ESRC social sciences, a lot of that data is personal data, names, addresses. They will never share that. They share the anonymized version. But now, as they're moving into thinking even larger, should they actually share the code? Should they actually share different software and workflows that they created? I think even more accent is being put on impact from previous outputs that weren't necessarily considered so impactful, I would say, because even with syntax, we have seen it. We have the reshare repository that's suitable for smaller scale and experimental data, but also for code. And we have some collections that have been downloaded, going back to what Ulrich was saying about downloads, that can be a measure as well. We have some collections that consist only of code that have been downloaded hundreds of times. That demonstrates the value in a piece of Stata do file or SPSS or R code and so on.
Thank you very much.
Yes, thank you. And we have a question from Jakob in the chat. Would you like to take this?
Yeah, I know Stefan had some different approaches, and Ulrich has mentioned it as well. But Christina, you have a concrete tool you are using, and you mentioned it was used mostly in the beginning of the projects. And I'm just wondering whether the tool is hitting within the mark. Is it within an acceptable range of what you are seeing when the project has ended? And are there some sort of evaluation afterwards?
I will start with a disclaimer. This is rather anecdotally because we haven't done any proper research like surveys or interviews, but based on discussions with them, ESRC actually have a compliance policy. So if researchers do not deposit their data at the end of the project, they can then no longer apply for new funding from ESRC. So it's quite easy to see who applied the proper costing and actually respected what they said they're going to do compared to who didn't. I would say about 1 in 10 projects, despite the fact that they might have planned for it, it just falls to the crack. And at the end of the research project, they don't necessarily have the quality of the materials that would be needed to actually call that fair. So it does happen. It's not bulletproof in any shape, way, or form. But I would say the ones that use the tool are the ones that start engaging throughout the project with us, and they start asking us questions. Is this documentation sufficient? Would you like this? Would you like that? And some of them are even more proactive. Before putting in their funding bid, they actually get in touch with UKDS to check. And I know it's more resource definitely invested from the funder's perspective, because of course they need the resource on the UK data service end. But realistically, it helps so much when researchers get in touch with us before they put their funding bids in, because that is where we can start actually supporting them. When they get in touch and they've already collected gigs of data that has no documentation, well, that can be difficult for everyone involved. When they start from the beginning, it's fantastic. We were just having a meeting with ESRC probably a couple of months ago, because we're looking at whether the data management planning could actually change a little bit. And at the initial project application stage, to have a question, a very wide question around data management planning, trying to understand whether the researcher applying understands data management activities and they're prepared to conduct data management. And when they are actually successful in their funding, that's when they're mandated to create a data management plan that is shared with the data service to actually check all the steps and advise on consent issues, legal issues, and so on. This is only planned. We don't know whether that will be implemented, but from our end, we think that will just work marvels and reduce the stress for the researchers, because I think that there's also that. There's so much anxiety with researchers thinking, oh, am I doing the wrong thing? And just having that support more proactively. No, sorry for not being able to provide proper numbers or having...
Not at all. And interesting aspect as well. Does have other goals than estimating costs. Yeah.
Yes.
And thank you to all the presenters.
We have a few minutes left. So yes, Susanne, you have a question?
Or actually rather a comment, which I normally hate, but sorry, I will do it anyway. Ulrik, you mentioned that you at the funders, and it would also be very nice to hear from Sylvia, that you are worrying a little bit about like introducing these requirements because you don't have any advice to how researchers should deal with these requirements. And as I hopefully also try to make clear a little bit, that I think is really obviously a task that lies at the universities, and we actually would be really grateful to have that task. It sounds a little bit strange because yes, we are busy, but having these funder requirements, actually, we actually all universities in Denmark, I think now can live up to these requirements. We already have frameworks, data management plans, templates, support workshops, and we have national networks where the different universities actually help each other, building up these sort of support structures to reply to funder requirements. I personally would welcome these requirements because I mean it helps us to build up more data management support structure that in the end will be beneficial for all researchers and not just those that that apply for Novo Nordisk Foundation's money. So I don't know, it's maybe a little bit strange, chicken or the egg, but I think it's a clear task that the universities have to help researchers manage the agreement, the requirements in the grant agreements, and I think that we in Denmark are actually gearing up to be pretty well equipped to do that task. I don't know if my colleagues want to say something about that as well. But
I fully agree. And I think the time, at least for the journey of Denmark, is starting to be ripe to do this. But if you go back 6 months, there wasn't a repository, a national one, where you could, in fact, deposit your data. So if we put in, you have to do this, and you were in a field that was not bioinformatics, where there are international repositories where you just put the data, then people would call and say, how do I actually practically share the data? Where should I deposit it such that it complies? And the answer would be, you have to figure that out yourself because we don't know. And this
but we do.
And this is where things are changing now, because it's this chicken and the egg, but now we have the egg or the chicken, whichever. So we can build from that. But I also think in terms of this valuation of data, it's also a matter of, in the beginning, of course, you have to verify the data. It's a good idea, even if you didn't ever share it. It's just a good research practice to do this because you need it for the analysis. And then once you share it, typically it would be shared in some repository where it would be stored at least 10 or 15 years. The big question comes with these, and I worked a lot with this in the pharma industry, that you have to classify all data sets in terms of retention policy. How long does it make sense to keep this? And you have to think of that as a question that is not dealt with by the person that uploaded it or created it, because that person might have quit their job at the university. They may have retired. They may have even died. So someone else down the road has to evaluate whether to keep this or not. And it's so much easier to have that discussion, at least initially, when you upload it. and this is, we're not there yet, right? Because we're starting to share these data. So the big problem would come 10, 15 years after, when someone else, that is maybe none of us, have to figure out whether to keep this or not. And this is where the tools for evaluating the value comes in, or classifying the data. There might be things that we want to keep for historical reasons. And we do have a mechanism in Denmark, and I think most countries have that. We have the national archives. They have sort of a mandate to store things that are historically relevant or interesting to store. They won't store everything, but this is the interesting question. If they're not keeping a copy of it, should we? Should University of Copenhagen, should the state keep a copy of this or not? And this is going to be interesting, but right now it's not the main problem, right? Because we're sort of pushing this 10 years into the future.
Thank you. I think we are getting close to 11 o'clock. So we'll wrap this up now, but a very big thank you to all of the speakers for sharing their experiences and knowledge and expertise on the topic. We hope that everybody got something out of this webinar today, so that you can think about or maybe even put into practice. This material will be available on the Fair Impact website within the next few days. And then, yeah, we wish you a great day, and thank you for joining us, everyone. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Bye bye.
Bye.